We'll get started in about 3 minutes. Thanks for your patience. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining in this afternoon. Morning. It's almost afternoon, though. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Are you seeing the course homepage now?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. What is this? Bear with me. I got things popping up, trying to pop up here, and I'm closing them down. All right. So on Tuesday, we started looking at our first experiment that deals with error analysis. So I covered the experiment handout, which discusses the various types of error. And I also covered in that same handout the instructions for experiment number 1. So I discussed the random error, systematic error, and how you deal with each of them. And then we started looking at, I don't know why this page is swapped like that, but we looked at percent error, the formula, and worked through an example. And then I covered the instructions, these instructions that deal with your first experiment. Remember, these instructions are how to, right? Which is something that you will have to include in your first lab report, which I also discussed. right? We looked at this template, and I discussed the whole idea of, following this format. When you write your first lab report, you have to, fill it. Basically, it's a template, fill it in, right? And I gave you the option of using my sample data, or, as I said, you can make your own measurements. If you use my sample data, when you do the abstract, you're doing it under the what if you had to make these same measurements that are in the sample data. If you make your own measurements, then explain the process that you went through. The idea for the abstract is that you need to be detailed enough so that anybody, whether they're knowledgeable about this material or not, could follow your abstract and reproduce this experiment, right? Because we know that, a key aspect of science is a reproducibility, right? And so you want to give sufficient detail so that you could walk outside your house and the first person you see, hand them your lab report, and they would be able to go and complete this experiment. Okay, and so we went through all of the sections of the lab report that you need to write. And then I explained, the conclusion is you telling me something that you learned from going through this whole experiment and lab report process, right? Something that you learned about error analysis that you didn't know before you started this whole process, whether it's a concept, a formula, a piece of equipment, any of those kinds of things. Tell me something that you learned. And then the very last thing I asked you was to explain to me why you never got 0% error. Okay, so I covered all of that on Tuesday. And so that's the point that I want to come back to right now. I asked the question on Tuesday, but I'm asking now that you have had a chance to go and interact with this template for your first lab report, what are your questions?
When you say, can we just copy and paste this and put it in a Word document and then just fill it in?
Absolutely. I mentioned that on Tuesday, that is definitely the option that some people will utilize, copy and paste and fill it in. Just be mindful that, my table has these thin little rows here, but of course, if you're typing in there, everything has to fit into that space. So, you may want to make the rows a little fatter so you can have room, right?
Yeah, okay.
Right. Any other questions? Please don't hesitate. I want to make sure you're crystal clear on what you have to do, because this is like your first chance at stab at a lab report.
Do you have a preference? Would you rather us do a Word doc, or can we just write it out?
As long as it's neat and I can read it, writing it out is fine too.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I don't have a preference. I try to make this easy, right? Whatever way you want to reproduce it, fine, as long as you follow the layout and structure. I don't care if you handwrite it, type it, whatever floats your boat. It's really up to you. And and I try to make submitting your assignments really straightforward here. It tells you basically, if you type it, just email me the file that you typed in. If you handwrite it, take a picture of it or scan it to a PDF and email it to me. I mean, I figure everybody knows how to send email, so just email me your assignment. That makes things, a whole lot easier on everybody.
For emailing you the assignment, I just got my student email.
Yeah.
I couldn't really. I don't know if you got my syllabus email. I messaged you, but I don't know if you got that either. But I don't.
I'm not. And who's asking me the question? Is that Trevor?
Yeah.
Yeah. If I receive your email, I responded to it. Like I tell students, and and I make this obvious. I put it in the syllabus and everywhere. If you email me something and you don't hear from me in 24 hours, it means I didn't get your email.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah. Any other questions about the lab report that you have to write?
One more question. Would you rather it on graph and paper, or it doesn't matter?
No, these aren't graphs. I mean, I don't have a preference. If you put it on that kind of paper, fine, but you know, these aren't graphs, right? So if you put it on plain paper, that's fine too. Now, there will, when we start talking about graphing next week, there will come a time when you will have to use graph paper because you'll be doing actual graphs. But you know, whatever kind of paper you're using to write it out or whatever, that's fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Anybody else? Okay, so the other thing that you have to focus on this week is the post lab for this, right? So the way this works is that you do the experiment, you do the lab report, and then you do the post lab. Now, granted, some of you are going to be using my sample data. So, you know, again, what if you were making those measurements, right? But still, that's the experiment. And you do the lab report using the template I provided. And then you do the post lab, okay? So let me explain the post lab. The post lab is like a discussion that you're having with your classmates about this topic, about this experiment, right? And so I ask questions that relate to the experiment. If you have the experiment handout, then it'll make answering these questions easier because you can follow. Many of the questions are directly geared toward the information in that experiment handout. Okay, so I always tell students, when you get ready to answer these questions, have the experiment handout close by and it'll help you out. So you hit the reply button and you post your answers to the questions, all 5 of them. And then once you posted your answers, you reply to what 2 of your classmates have posted, okay? So if we were all in a classroom face to face, I would put these 5 questions up on the big screen and say, you know, form teams, 2 to 3 person teams, and work together to answer these questions. So while you're doing that, you would be talking with each other, right? Hey, you know, what's going on with question number 3? I'm not real sure what she means by that or what. And you work together and dialogue and discuss with each other these questions and then, you know, as a team, answer them, right? Of course, each person would turn in their own work, but you could work together in groups to come up with the answers, sharing ideas with each other. Well, we're in a virtual class. So the best that I can do is to create a discussion where you post your answers to the questions first, and then you have a discussion with your classmates about what they posted. And things like, I like your answers, or I agree, or we got the same thing, that's not a discussion. A discussion would be, hey, you know, why did you answer question number 3 the way you did? What was your thinking there? Okay. Or, you know, maybe you got the same thing, but, you know, you arrived at it in a different way. Or maybe you don't agree with what they wrote at all. And you explain why you disagreed with what they have, right? The idea is to, as best as we can in this, you know, virtual environment, reproduce the conversations that could take place if you were face to face. That's the idea behind this. It's another way for you to dive deeper into this material. Okay. I always tell folks, the way you know for sure that you understand something is that you can teach it to somebody else, right? I mean, I can't, if I didn't know this stuff, I couldn't teach it to you, right? And so, you know, you're taking the opportunity to express what you understand and then to dialogue with somebody else about what they understand, okay? And then between, you know, it said, you know, two heads are better than one, right? So you could figure it out between between the 2 of you, right? And you're going to do that for 2 classmates, All right. If you go back under assignments and activities, the information on post labs is available. It explains what you do with post labs and how I score them. That information was also in the syllabus if you took a look at it, right? So you know exactly what the expectations are, okay, in terms of what you should be doing and how I'm gonna grade it, all right? So any questions about the post lab?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. So we can just take a quick peek at what you have coming up next week. Remember, let me just conclude by saying all of the items that you have to turn in for the error analysis overview are due by this Saturday. That's your lab report and post lab. And then next week, we're gonna start taking a look at graphing, okay? So after you've taken care of everything that's due Saturday, before you come back to class on Tuesday, take a look at, you know, some of the materials that I put out here regarding graphing, and we're gonna go into that on starting next Tuesday. I'm gonna also talk about the project. Those of you who have me for lecture class, I've already talked about the project there, but you know, I'll be repeating that conversation, and you know, hopefully those people who might have missed it in lecture will catch my coverage on next Tuesday here in lab class. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop the share, and I always like to conclude by asking, what are your questions at this point?
I don't have any questions, Ms. Sinon.
I got one. So every time I try and get onto my Nunez email, it just brings me to Office 365.
Yeah,
And
that's an IT question. I can't help you with that.
okay.
Yeah, in the meantime, you could use your personal email to communicate with me until you get the kinks worked out.
All right. That's it then. Thank you.
Sure. All right, so if there are no more questions, thank you for joining a brief meeting today, and I'll see you back here on Tuesday. I will just say, you know, before that, just for the record, there may be times where we don't have to meet on Thursday. We'll start to get a routine going, and you'll see that sometimes we'll meet on Tuesday and cover what we need to, or sometimes we might not meet on Tuesday and meet on Thursday. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, so it's not going to be both on Tuesday and Thursday after the lecture.
Sometimes we'll
Okay.
just have to, it depends on what we have to cover.
But you'll send us a notification letting us know.
Of course, absolutely.
Okay. All right,
Absolutely.
that sounds perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
You have a good day.
You do the same.